Good morning, all. Now, this is the nearest I think I'm ever going to get to doing a series. I mean, I acknowledge Jamie to be the king of the preaching series, the man for all series. But this is potentially a two-parter if I'm allowed to do the second part in a month's time. I never intended that, though. Let me explain it, really. I thought I wanted to talk about choices, the choices that we make as believers and so on. And the character I wanted to focus in on was a guy called Lot. Now, Lot is Abraham's nephew. Now, when God calls Abraham out on his step of faith to go into the unknown, where God's going to bless him by putting a blessing for the whole world through him, his nephew Lot is the one who goes with him. He's the guy whose wife is turned into a pillar of salt when she gets disobedient and looks back at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that was the character I'd thought about. Because I like talking about characters. I think it's the English teacher in me. You know, you kind of like, when you're looking at literature, to look at the characters and their motives and what they might be thinking, reading between the lines. And the characters in the Bible are so interesting. I mean, if you ever want any evidence, not probably that you do, that the Bible is not a work of fiction, just look at the characters. If you were writing it as a work of fiction, you would never put half those people in. Look at the disciples. Would you put them in? This is Jesus' hand-picked elite. They see Jesus turn water into wine, calm storms, walk on the lake, lepers get healed, blind people get their sight back. People who've never walked before pick up their mats and wander off. Dead people are raised, one at a distance with just a word, another who's been in the tomb so long he starts to decompose. He feeds 5,000 people with a couple of fish butties, and they still stand around and go, who do you think he is then? You know, Jesus teaches them in simple parables, and they don't get it. No, my head hurts. I can't get that. I mean, somebody would say, come on, make them a bit sharper than that. But at least they're real. At least we kind of can relate to them. Because there are characters in the Bible I can't get. Not that I don't believe in them or don't like them, but I can't connect with them. Paul's one of those. He's too perfect. I don't know. I struggle with some of the doctrine in the New Testament, but Paul gets it all because he wrote half of it. So he's got this amazing mind, this fantastic writing style, and manages to fit in, wandering around the world, planting churches and preaching to people. Nothing phases him. Snakes, no problem. Shipwrecks, piece of pudding. I know, you beat him up and he just kind of picks himself up and starts preaching again. Lock him in a dungeon, he sings choruses at you, and at the end of it, he kind of looks around and says, oh, what a miserable wretch am I never do what I should. So I'm thinking, well, if they were all visiting us today, I could talk to Peter, because I think I could get on with him, but I'd have to swerve Paul, because I think, if you think you're a miserable wretch, what do you think that makes me feel like? I worry about people with this huge amount of faith. They scare me, they make me feel insecure. So in the Old Testament, the character I've always shied away from is Abraham. Because when I think of Abraham, I always picture this mountain of faith. You know, this guy who never doubts. I know he makes mistakes. Like, he's not perfect. I mean, all that business with Hagar and Ishmael was a bit messy. But, I don't know, he just kind of is faith in human form. I mean, you look at Hebrews 11, and there's little lists of all these people, by faith so-and-so did this. Most of them get one line. Not Abraham, oh no, he gets 5. He gets a great chunk. By faith Abraham did this, by faith he did that. I mean, when God says, go and sacrifice your son, he goes, yeah, okay, come on, Isaac, keep up, I'm off. Oh, don't let me forget me butcher's knife with me, I'll need that. You think, hang on, you've just been asked to sacrifice your son. Where's the bit where you turn around and say, no? Who do you think I am? Come on, I must have heard that wrong, but no, he's off. So I kind of thought that his calling was a bit like that. That God says, I want you to leave everything, I want you to go off into the unknown, into a place you've never been, and I'm going to show you. And he just goes. He's off. I kind of pictured him wandering out of the city and going, wow, this is exciting. Which way do I go, God? Left or right? Left, right, I'm off. Come on, guys, up we come. Oh, there's a roundabout up ahead, Lord. Which exit? Third exit? Right, that's okay. And I thought it was like that. Oh, this is exciting. He's just off like an Old Testament whippet. Boom. But I thought, well, look, if I'm going to talk about Lot and his choices, I'm going to have to look at Abraham just to make sure I've got the facts right. So I looked at the calling of Abraham. And when I started looking at it, I thought, hang on, it's not quite what I thought it was. It's a little bit different. I'd missed that. And the more that I started looking at it, the less it was like I'd thought. But something amazing happened. I've had more, fun's not the right word, but preparing this message, and I'm not quite sure where it fits into everything. But I've had a great fun doing this one, because in the process of looking beneath the surface, Abraham has come alive. And even if you don't pick up anything on the message here, if you can pick up this, kind of these Bible characters leaping out of the page at you to become three-dimensional and human, not just this little figure of faith, just doing it, then that's something. So I wanted to look at the calling of Abraham. So Lot got put onto the back burner for next month if I'm allowed to preach it. And I thought, this week I'll look at the calling of Abraham. So I'm wanting to take you on two journeys. First of all, Abraham's journey. But secondly, the journey in the sense that I've been on. I wanted to kind of take you step by step through how I was looking at this. So it's a bit of a strange one, this. See what you make of it. But let's look at the calling of Abraham. Are we onto the screen? Come on, scripture. Because otherwise I'll have to read it. Are we all right with it? Here we go. Okay. Genesis 12, first 5 verses. The call of Abraham. By the way, I know he was called Abraham. God changes his name later. I'm going to call him Abraham throughout here. This is what it says. The call of Abraham, Genesis 12. The Lord had said to Abraham, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Okay, so when I read that, I thought, yeah, that's pretty much as I thought. God gives Abraham all these promises. He calls him. No dispute. Off he goes. There was only one detail that I thought, well, hang on. I'd not caught that. And that's the name of this place, Haran. And I thought, I'm not a Bible scholar, so I'll be honest with you. I had never heard that name before in my life, to my knowledge. In fact, I thought I was absolutely certain where Abraham was when he was called. And it was in a place called spelled U-R, of the Chaldeans. It was a name that I kind of remembered. In fact, I was so confident of it, if I'd been a phone a friend on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and that was the £1 million question, I would have said, go for it. It's definite. And then, so I thought, well, hang on, I better look this up here. I better check this, whether I'm right or I'm just misremembering things. So where was Abraham when he was called? And actually, for once, I'm right. When God calls Abraham, he was in a place called of the Chaldeans. There's no doubt about it. We get, hang on, next one. I'm going to have to put that there. We get it when Stephen was talking to the Sanhedrin before they stoned him to death. He says this, the God of glory appeared to our father Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia before he lived in Haran. Leave your country and your people, God said, and go to the land I will show you. So he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. Well, okay. Mesopotamia, I knew where that was. That's where I thought was, southern Iraq. And just in case we think that Stephen has made a mistake, We also get it from Nehemiah. Nehemiah 9 verse 7. Nehemiah said when praying to God, "You are the Lord God who chose Abraham and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans." And if you want the conclusive proof, the next one, God himself. The Lord himself reminded Abraham later when he was in Canaan, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of." So there's no doubt. When God calls Abraham to go on his journey of faith, he is in Ur of the Chaldeans, which is in southern Iraq, roughly. If you want a city that's kind of in the area, that's modern, that you will have heard of, to pinpoint it, then it would probably be Basra. Now, Basra is a place where the British troops had to defend after the Iraq War, and it's 180 British soldiers, I think, died in that conflict. A vast majority of them in or around Basra. But that's where it was. That's where Abraham was. So I thought, well, hang on, I've got to check out this Haran place now. But before I do that, let's back up to the previous chapter, Genesis 11, and meet the family. Because Genesis 11 is one of these genealogy chapters, Abraham's genealogy, and it's one of those ones we often skip. It goes through all the fathers and their sons and how old they were and so on. But when we get to verse 27, we come up with Abraham's immediate family. And this is what it says. Abraham's family, Genesis 11, verse 27. This is an account of Terah's family line. A lot of names coming up here. Stick with us. Terah became the family of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. And she was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter Sarai, daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years and he died in Haran. So there's the family. Meet the family. Abraham's got a brother, Haran, similar name to the town they finish up in, apparently. Different spelling, different name. But he's got a brother called Haran who dies, and Haran is the father of Lot. Which kind of explains one little question I was asking. Why does Lot finish up going with Abraham? Oh, because his father's died, so he tags himself along with his favourite uncle. There's another brother called Nahor, who marries a girl called Milcah, who's the daughter of Haran. So Nahor marries his niece. And then there's Sarai, Abraham's wife, who can't bear children. And right at the top of it, there's this guy Terah, Abraham's father. That's the family who are there in Ur when all this starts, all this kicks off. But when I read that, three things struck me. Firstly, unlike I'd thought, it wasn't quite a matter of Abraham walking out of the city and thinking, which way do I go? No, they had a destination. They knew they were going to Canaan, to modern Israel, that area. They knew where they were going. So it's not quite the big step of faith that I thought. There is a general direction. It's a bit like God telling you to go to London. Well, at least you know what train to get on, what motorway to pick up. It's just that when you get a bit closer, you'd like God to fine up the details to tell you which part of London you're going to wind up in. So it's a step of faith, but it's not quite this massive one. So I'm okay with that. But there are two questions that I'm coming up with, reading that. Firstly, if Abraham is called by God to go on this journey, why is it his father who leads him? It says Terah took his son Abram, like he's at the front. Hang on, if it's your calling, Abraham, why is your father leading you? Now, I thought perhaps that's not important. Perhaps that's just cultural. He's the head of the household, so logically he would go ahead. Perhaps it's just that. But the second thing, and more significant thing, of course, is why do they stop at Haran? And it doesn't say they just stopped. It says they settled. It means they put down roots. Why did they not get where they were trying to get to? So I thought I've got two questions now. Why does Terah lead? And why don't they get to the end of their journey that God called them on? Well, the answer, we need to go back to Ur, I suppose. What do we know about where they were originally. We know where it is, southern Iraq. We know it's got the world's stupidest name for a city, sorry. I mean, if you were trying to get directions to you'd sound like you didn't know. Where are you trying to get to? No, come on, where are you trying to... Don't you know? So it's got a stupid name, and it's in southern Iraq, and it's a prosperous city, apparently, so Abraham wasn't being told to leave some little shanty town somewhere. He must have had quite a comfortable life there. But there's something else about that we tend to forget. That was an entirely pagan city. We're dealing with a time when God has kind of, the knowledge of God in the days of Noah and so on and the flood have long since gone out of people's memory. And when God stops involving himself in people's lives on a day-to-day basis, they drift. And they drift into their own little religions, their own gods, their own personal gods. And in the god that they had that kind of reigned over them was the moon god. They worshipped lunar deities. The moon god was a guy called Nana, or sometimes called, alternative name, Sin, which is a great name for a false god. Sin, the moon god. So all these people worshipped the moon god Sin. So I thought, well, hang on. What about Abraham's family? Were they a little pocket of believers who the father had kept kind of protected from this pagan world they were in? Was it possible that that's why God selected them, selected Abraham? Well, no. Not according to Joshua, it isn't. Because when Joshua was renewing the covenant in the land of Israel, in his final speech to the people, he says this: Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, the leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants." So Terah was a pagan. Abraham's father was an idolater. He worshipped, presumably, the moon god Sin. Now, is it likely that the rest of the family were kind of believers and the father believes something? Well, that's not culturally very likely. And we know one thing, that Abraham had a brother called Haran who had a daughter called Milcah. And Milcah was named in honor of a lunar deity, because Milcah was the daughter of Sin. She was a lunar goddess. So one of Abraham's brothers, at least, names his daughter after a pagan goddess. Might mean nothing, but I don't see many born-again Christians having a son and naming him Muhammad. It's not likely. And of course, Sarah, or Sarai, who Abraham marries, is also named in honor of a lunar goddess. She was Sin's wife. So we've got at least two of the women there who were named after lunar goddesses. So it would seem to me logical to say that, wait a minute, the whole family are pagans. And then the kind of penny drops. And it's something that probably the Bible scholars here know, but I didn't, that Abraham was a pagan moon worshipper. Now, I've not seen that. That this mighty man of God, the founder of the Jewish nation, the Hebrew nation, the man through whom God chose to bless the whole world, was a moon worshipper. Now, I'm liking him a bit now. I'm liking him a bit more because he's not quite this mighty figure of faith that I thought. He's a pagan in a pagan world, worshipping a pagan God. And then one day, God steps into his life. My word, what must that have been like as a meeting? Can you imagine that? That you're worshipping a false God and suddenly God turns up. And remember what Stephen said to the Sanhedrin. It wasn't a matter of God speaking to him. It says the God of glory appeared to Abraham. Now that must have been some meeting that took his head apart, don't you reckon? See, I remember sitting in a church in Great Harwood in 1988, listening to some guy talking about the crucifixion and just sitting at the back and praying in my head, God, if you're real, show me. And God kind of joined two loose ends in my brain to say, basically, yeah, it's true. I remember the impact of that meeting. That your life changes. You can't go back from that. It's life-changing. But that was nothing like what happened to Abraham. I mean, I had a Christian wife. Her family were Christians. I knew about Christian choruses. I've been brought up in a so-called Christian environment with RE lessons at school. I had a background in Christianity, so therefore it wasn't quite a shock. But that changed my life. But Abraham had none of that. Abraham had no knowledge. Nobody had fed him anything. His father was a pagan. His environment was pagan. And suddenly God turns up in his life, and I reckon it blew his head off. Everything in his world suddenly went up in smoke. No wonder he went on that journey. He had no option, really. What was there for him back in Ur? I even kind of understand why he followed Terah. Perhaps it was so much going on in his world that he thought, it's nice to have company. It's nice to have somebody taking a bit of responsibility. I'm leaving my homeland. My religion's been blown out of the water. This is something totally new. Perhaps that felt comforting, I don't know. Or perhaps he just didn't want to abandon his father back in Ur. One son had died. Perhaps I don't want to leave him on his own over there. Perhaps that's why Terah went with him. But now, Abraham's journey is becoming a little bit more real. Do you see what I'm getting at? Before, it was kind of this big journey of faith with this mighty man of faith. Now, it's something a little bit different. Because now I'm no longer asking that question, why did Terah lead? As they walk out of Ur, heading in the general direction of Canaan, and Abraham's at the back of the queue following his father, there's a different question. Why is he there at all? Why is Terah there at all? Why is he taking him with him? He was told to leave two things, his homeland and his father's household. Now he leaves one. He sure as heck doesn't leave the other. He takes a whole lot with him. So Abraham, far from being this mighty man of faith that I can't get close, is much more like me than I thought. He does half a job. He might have had good reasons. Can't abandon my father. Family values, sentiment, or security. Nice to have a friendly face. He might have had all the good reasons in the world, don't we all? But nevertheless, he only did half a job. And when you only do half a job, the bit that you don't do is, of course, going to store up problems to come back and bite you. It's what God said to the Israelites when they go into the promised land. Can you take that one off on that one? You don't need it, thanks. It's when God took the Israelites into the promised land and said, all these people, get rid of them. Wipe them out. Their time is gone. Because the ones that you leave in place will come back to bite you. It's the same way he does when he tells us about sin in your life. Deal with it all, because the bit that you leave undealt with will come back to haunt you. It will cause you a problem. It may not seem it at the time. There may be jolly good reasons why you don't want to do it, but do it because I can see the bigger picture. And that's Abraham's problem. He never saw the bigger picture. He didn't get it. God saw it. Because God was doing something new. You do get that, don't you? You do get the fact that Abraham had to be a pagan. So did his wife have to be pagans. They couldn't have been believers. See, somebody could take a little bit of credit in my becoming a Christian, praying for me, the knowledge that had been fed into me. But God was doing something totally new. So nobody could take the credit for anything that happened to Abraham. He knew nothing apart from that meeting with God. It was all done supernaturally. Same with Sarah. She couldn't have children. Why would God choose a woman who wasn't able to bear children? Because God was going to take the credit for what happens. Human beings could take none of it. See, God saw the bigger picture. Abraham didn't. I'm doing most of the job. Perhaps I can take my dad with me. But he doesn't. He shouldn't have. The calling was on Abraham and Sarah alone. It should have been those two heading to Canaan. Nobody else. Not anybody, not Lot, not Terah, none of them. They should have gone on their own. That was their calling. But he doesn't. He does half a job, and it causes problems. He never gets there. Now the question is different, isn't it? Not why is Terah leading. The question why do they stop at Haran is now obvious. They stop at Haran because Terah says to stop at Haran. Abraham is called to be a pioneer, but puts himself under the authority of somebody who shouldn't even have been on his journey. And in fact, he even puts himself under the authority of a moon worshipper. That's not going to work out well. And as a result, they stop. And when they stop, when Terah decides to stop, Abraham, having put himself under that authority, has to stop with him until that authority is removed. Years later, when Terah dies, then God calls him a second time in Genesis 12, and he can continue his journey with the same calling that was years ago in Ur. Now can I remind you of the calling I set you out on? Well, why does Terah stop at Haran? Perhaps he got tired. And by the way, where is Haran? It's actually 600 miles away from Ur on a 1,000-mile journey to Canaan. If you want a town that kind of pinpoints it, although it's a little bit further on than that, it'll be Mosul, where the Iraqi forces at the moment are trying to just take in the airport. But it's a bit further on than that. It's a bit closer to Turkey. So Abraham is called in Ur to go to Canaan, makes it as far as Haran. Or he's called in Basra to go to Jerusalem, only makes it as far as Mosul. He makes it 600 miles of a 1,000-mile journey, and then has to stop. And I would suggest that Terah stops at Haran because he got tired, he got old, he got sick, he got fed up of traveling. But there's one other thing about Haran that might have affected his judgment, and that's it's another pagan city. And guess which god they worship there? Sin. So perhaps Terah looked at it and thought, I feel comfortable here. This reminds me of home. This will do me. They even worship the same God. And because Abraham had placed himself under that authority, his journey ground to a halt as well. See, Abraham was a pioneer, called to be a pioneer. And there's a lot of preaching that goes on in churches these days. I've heard a lot. You may have heard sermons on it. Pioneers and settlers. Are you a pioneer or a settler? Where I've heard it presented in the past, in previous churches, is the idea that pioneers are young people. Get up and go. They're trying to build these big funky churches with lights and loud music. While settlers, of course, are like me. Stuck in our denominations, kind of sitting there, resistant to every change. It was taught, do you remember, Liz, in one of the previous churches, as left-brainers and right-brainers. This was an American thing. That left-brainers are people who think outside the box, and right-brainers are people like everybody else, who're just stuck in their ways. And God wants left-brainers, pioneers, young people. Well, it's nothing to do with age. It's all to do with attitude, nothing to do with age. Joshua and Caleb were pioneers. They were two of the 12 spies who went off into the promised land. They were the two who came back with a positive report. But the others came back with a negative report. We can't do it. And Moses had made the big mistake of putting it to a vote, putting God's plan to the vote. And so Joshua and Caleb's pioneer spirit had to come under the authority of the majority. And as a result, those two pioneers, Joshua and Caleb, had to become settlers, wandering around in the wilderness until the authority that it placed over them was dead. Then, at 80 years old, they could go back in. Pioneers and settlers is an important concept just to pick up. America was colonized by pioneers and settlers, which is a bit ironic considering all the fuss they're having about immigrants. They're all immigrants, apart from the native Indians whose land they took. But when they colonized the east side of it, and then they pushed west in their wagon trains, going through the deserts, over the mountains, till the pioneers got to the west coast and California, some people on the journey became settlers. They got halfway along and said, this will do. This is nice. This reminds me of home. I'll even give it a name of a town I used to come from back in England, because it makes me feel sick. That's probably what happened to Terah. Felt exactly the same. But there's one thing about Christians, if you're debating whether you're a pioneer or a settler, is that every single Christian, doesn't matter about age, is a pioneer. God never called any Christian to be a settler. Because what's a settler really? But somebody who's come to the end of their journey. Somebody whose journey is finished. And when is any Christian going to say that, eh? Our life's journey might end, well, it's going to, but our Christian journey isn't. Not while there's one more person to tell about Jesus. Not while there's one more thing to deal with in your life that's perhaps keeping you a little bit away from God. Not while there's one thing new to learn about God. Now, when we've nobody left to tell, nothing to deal with in ourselves, and nothing more to know that's new about God, then our journey is finished. But I don't think that's going to happen this side of Jesus returning. We are all pioneers. None of us are called to be settlers. See, settlers accumulate stuff. When you're a pioneer, you don't. What's the point of acquiring stuff you've got to take on the next stage of your journey? But when you're a settler, you acquire things. And I think that's sometimes what happens in Christian journeys. I think denominations, I don't know if I'm being a bit controversial here, but I think that the Pentecostal movement started as a pioneer movement, very much so. But I rather suspect it became a settler denomination. And when it becomes a settler denomination, it acquires stuff, traditions, particular mindsets, particular attitudes, the way we do things, and becomes very narrow and boxed in. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, get thrown out on this, I'm sure, I'm not allowed to preach again, but the first Pentecostals I met when I became a Christian about 30 years ago were deeply uninspiring people. They put me off. I realize now, and I thought I never want to be anything connected with Pentecostalism. No, not having that. They seem so narrow. I realize what they were now were just settlers. They'd been in a settler church, in a settler denomination, like the settlers in America, building their little stockades, putting themselves inside it and looking at the outside world that was wrong, while everything they were protecting inside their little stockade was right, pointing the finger at other people. They were deeply... it can happen to churches as well. That churches can be pioneer churches. Perhaps this one becomes a settler church and acquires traditions and what you put on your head and stuff like that. And I think, isn't that possibly, whether you get this or not, the most exciting thing that's happening? It's not about the change of the layout, but what I sense in this church, if I'm putting it into that kind of language, is a church that may have been settler but is now rediscovering its pioneer roots. Don't you think so? That's where we are. Whether you get it or not, we have discovered no more settling, whatever being a pioneer means, which means, of course, that you move, that you're not the same at the end of this meeting that you were at the start, you're not the same next week as you were this week, that we are not settling. But of course it's possible for individuals to be settlers within a pioneer church, to think, now this is all right. Come on, Jamie, there's enough change going on, mate. I started off in Ur, you've got me to Haran, please don't make me go to Canaan. Let me stop here, it's comfortable, it's okay. Can I settle here? Enough change, thank you. But God never calls people to be settlers. So what can we learn? Because this is a strange message, I'm aware of this one, because it's really a journey that I've been on in unpacking Abraham and coming in, make him come somehow to a person I can identify with and I can learn from, and so on. And I've got him as far as Haran, and next time I want to take him and Lot on the next stage of the journey, to learn something from. I couldn't learn from him before. He's just this figure of faith. The only thing I could learn was when God says do it, just do it. But I struggle with it. Now I'm glad that Abraham did as well and got it wrong. Because even when he goes on the next stage of his journey, he takes Lot with him, which he was told not to do. So he gets it wrong a second time. And that has consequences as well. So what can we learn? Well, 3 things, I think, just to conclude with. 1, if God tells you to do a job, do a complete job. Don't leave it half done. God's got a reason to tell you to do stuff. He's not doing it just to be mean. If God tells you to put down a relationship, tell you what, put it down. There's a reason for it. You may not see it, but God can see around the corners. If you've got a bunch of friends and God is saying, what are you doing with them? What are you doing with people who talk like that, think like that, and act like that? You may have all the reasons in the world to think, no, yeah, well, I've been friends a long time or whatever. I'm trying to get them to church and all this kind of business. And it's not just a matter of when God tells you to do something, just drop it. Pray about it. Ask people about it. Not a knee-jerk reaction. But if God tells you to do it, do the complete job. Secondly, never put yourself under a human authority that is going to pull you away from God's authority. Be very careful what authority you place yourself under. And that's not an invitation, by the way, for people to be rebels. Nothing good about being a rebel. There are certain authorities you put yourself under that are perfectly right, aren't there? Like the law of the road. Tell you what, on the way back, we're going to drive on the left. The last thing I want to meet is somebody driving towards me on the right saying, I'm a rebel, nobody tells me what to do. You're not a rebel, you're just dangerous. When I'm teaching, I'm under the authority of the education department. I can't just do what I want. I was under the authority at Haslington of the head teacher, under the authority of the head of department for the English department. I don't have to like them or agree with them. I didn't. They were horrible. Particularly the head. You don't have to like it, but it's a safe place to be until they start to present you, say, with a piece of paper that says you've now got to teach that gay marriage is wonderful. Or that God had nothing to do with creation. Or that all religions are the same. And that all roads lead to heaven. Then you've got a choice to make. How are you going to deal with that? How are you going to process that one? Now you've got big decisions to make. But it's also the same in churches. Praise God we're not in that sort of church where the leaders tell us to put ourselves under their authority. But I tell you what, in many ways they're a minority. Because we've been in loads of places where that's been the big deal. Place yourself under the authority of the leaders. Come under my authority. We've even had it presented to us, and Liz will remember this at a particular meeting, where we're told that the Christian journey in this church is like being on a bus, driving a bus. And on a bus there can only be one driver. And if you don't like the journey, get off the bus. And the driver is, of course, the leader, or in a bigger church, the group of leaders who back each other up, friends and family and so on. So this is not so much for us, because we're not in that sort of church. But it might be for anybody who picks this message up on YouTube, or somebody you may know who's being dragged into that sort of business. Because if they're ever told that kind of thing, put yourself under my authority, tell you what, get off the bus. Because what you're being told to become is a settler. You become a passenger, you're a settler. Your journey is over, you're now on my journey. And when I talk about releasing you into your ministry, I'm releasing you into a ministry that serves my journey. Your journey's over. God never tells you to do that. And thirdly, finally, never put yourself under the authority of a mindset that conflicts with God as well. Never put yourself under authority that tells you you're something less than God tells you you are. Don't do it. If God tells you you are more than a conqueror, if you can do all things, if God tells you you are this, and your head tells you you're something not less than that, don't put yourself under that authority either. If your head tells you that you are a settler, and it's okay to be a settler because your job is done, your time is over, there's nothing more that you can do, step aside and leave it to the younger generation of pioneers, where you're putting yourself under an authority that God never wanted you to place yourself under. And if you do that, you're doing just what Abraham did. And his journey stalled until that authority was removed. No, actually, I'm going to leave it at that point. I'm not going to do some kind of altar call because I have nothing to say. We've had the prayer for each other and that kind of opportunity. But of course, if there is anything that you want to kind of come back at later, things that you want to pray about, things that you want to talk about, then obviously do that. But I'm going to leave it there and hand over to Jamie to kind of wrap us up on this. God bless you, folks. Thank you for listening. And if I'm allowed, see you next month.